Hey everybody, this is Chris Thompson, and welcome to session number 25 of Brain Software with Dr. Mike Mandel. He carries 2 passports, refuses to text message, and is the founder of the Valdemar Group. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you, Chris. Always wonderful to be here in the very appendix of Global Hypnosis, Toronto, Canada. And Chris just had a really interesting telemarketing call, and I was trying to get him to say that he had terminal undiagnosed testicular cancer, which of course doesn't make any sense, but he refused to say it on the phone, but it would have been wonderful. I like messing with telemarketers. Now, I know these poor people are just doing their job, but it drives me nuts when I'm in the middle of a busy day. I don't phone them and bother them. Why are they phoning me? I'm supposed to be on some sort of no-call list, the Canada no-call list, where they're fined $10,000 or something. I think that lasted about 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Anyway, back to your issues.
Well, let's back to my issues. So we are in a very good mood right now because we just laughed our faces off at this call. Anyway, let's
laughing at our own brilliance.
Let's start here though, because did you notice I put it on speakerphone because I got the phone call. The phone call was from. I got the phone call literally a second before we were about to hit the record button, and so I put it on speakerphone so Mike could hear the call. And the first thing that this woman did was she's trying to keep my business. It's Rogers Communications. I'm moving my phone number over to another provider.
That name, or should we edit it out?
No.
We'll remember to edit it out.
Yeah, we'll remember not. So the first thing, of course, she does, calling me. Keep in mind, she's calling me. I would like to verify your postal account. Postal code. Switching to English.
Yeah.
To verify your postal code so that I can look into your account and see what I can do for you.
Yeah, I bet.
Now, notice the attempt at a compliance attempt here, right? Can I verify your postal code? Well, it's easier for me to just say, actually, I'll save you the trouble because I have no intention of keeping my service with you, but I appreciate your call, and I'm just wondering how much longer the call's going to last.
Right.
And of course, then it's immediately uncomfortable and terminated.
Right. I like to tell people I don't speak English, and it works really, really well if you say it with a completely unaccented voice. So, we want to sell you this and this and this. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak English. Oh, okay, thank you, bye-bye. I say goodbye. They never question it.
We're going to have to start all of these podcasts with a Messin' with Telemarketers section.
I'm all for that, Chris.
All right. So anyway,
where are we going today?
Let's do some mentalism. At podcast number 1, I believe you promised more mentalism.
Oh, okay. Well,
we haven't done it in a while.
I've got one I was thinking of offering that it's actually not pure mentalism. It's more of a card effect, but it can be taught over a podcast. And it's a really cool thing. If it's sold, if it's delivered well and practiced, the effect of it on the other person's brain is out of all proportion to the simplicity of it. So here's what you do. In essence, you basically get a deck of cards and the other person shuffles it. So they shuffle it as much as they want and place them face down. And you turn your back. And when you do, they cut a small pack of cards from the top of the deck. Let's say 5 to 10, something. It doesn't matter. So say they've taken 4 cards. And they put those back in the card case out of sight so you don't know how many are gone. Then while your back is still turned, they look at that card sitting at that position from the top of the face down pack. So if they took 1 card away, they'd look at the top card. If they took 2, they'd look at the second card from the top. If they took 10, they'd look at the 10th card from the top. They memorize it and leave it in position and square the deck up again.
Let me just make sure I got this right. So they've taken a deck of cards, they've shuffled it with your back turned, and then they have cut a certain number of cards up to them. A
small pack of cards.
Off the top, so 5, 10, whatever.
Them.
Right,
counted them secretly.
And then they've looked at the one on the bottom of that pile.
No. Good thing we're clarifying here.
Yeah.
So say I've cut 5 cards off the top of the deck. I've counted there's 5. I don't tell the person, they don't tell me there's 5. They put the cards, that 5 cards back in the card case. And now that's given them a random number, in this case 5. So now they look at the 5th card from the top of the face down pack sitting on the table. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
And memorize it. So let's say it's Jack of Clubs. Now the pack is sitting squared up face down on the table, and you pick them up for the first time. And you say, you could have picked any card, couldn't you? It could have been an ace. And you go A, C, E, and you count 3 cards face down on the table and then put them underneath. You see, or it could have been a 2, T, W, O, and you count 3 cards, T, W, O, face down, put them under the pack. And you continue doing this. You might have picked a 3, T, H, R, E, E, or a 4, F, O, U, and you just go through them all until you get to king. And you sort of make it fun as you're doing it and silly and set the deck back on the table. And then you say, by the way, what was your card? That you got completely at random from the cards you cut, and I couldn't possibly know. And they say, oh, it's the Jack of Clubs. And you say, turn over the top card. And their card is now on the top of the deck. And it freaks people out because it seems so ludicrously impossible, even though it's a pretty stupid trick. And the beauty of it is, if they go home and try to do it, it won't work. It'll fail every time because you do something they don't know. The only gimmick, the only gaffe in the entire effect is you make sure there's a joker somewhere in the pack because there has to be 53 cards.
Oh.
And if there's 53 cards in the deck when you start and you go through that process, it will always be on top of the deck at the end. If there's 52, it'll be on the bottom, so it'll always screw up.
So it's just one of those funny statistical anomalies?
Yes, funny statistical anomaly is exactly what I was about to say.
I'm sure it was. So if I take 5 cards and I'm looking at the 10th one down.
Right,
so
no need to go into the math, but
5
yes,
cards,
yes.
5, just making sure I understand it correctly, because I'm gonna use this one and teach it to my daughter. She's gonna love it. So 53 cards. If I take 5 away, I'm left with 48. I'll be looking at the 43rd card, and the math just works that every single time, no matter what the number is.
I have no idea, but it does. Yeah,
That's awesome.
Math to me is a mystery.
Right.
Mine is language. It's not math, my thing. But yeah, give it a shot, because if you sell it well and do it cleanly and make it interesting and keep the cards in full view and let them shuffle them to death first, and don't point out there's a joker in the deck, just leave it there, it will startle them when they turn over the top card and it's theirs.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do some more mentalism tricks for people on these podcasts a bit more regularly, because I think those go really well. People enjoy learning these kinds of tricks.
Well, there's one I really, really want to teach, and it's where the person brings a brand new deck of cards of their own, and they cut half the cards, put them back in the case, shuffle the remaining pack, and deal them all face down in as many or as few piles as they want. Then they turn over one of the cards, while your back is turned, sign it, and put it back in, shuffle them on the deck, and then you bring in some sandwiches from the kitchen, and they bite down into their sandwich, and their signed card is in the sandwich. Now, it's kind of messy. And
Are you serious?
No, I'm not at all, Chris. I just made it up now. The only thing lacking is a way of actually making it work, but it's a brilliant trick.
Oh, man. Okay, I've known you long enough I had a feeling
Back to hypnosis.
That was completely made up. Okay, let's talk about, handwriting analysis and hypnosis. So we talked about this a few podcasts ago, maybe
right.
2 or 3.
People have been very interested in this.
Yeah, it gets... I think of all the things... the context was when we talked about the Architecture of Hypnosis class and we were debriefing it, I mentioned how there tends to end up a lot of conversation in the course about handwriting, because sometimes you'll bring up some examples.
There tends to end up a lot of conversation in the course about handwriting. What? You're switching to English?
Yes, sometimes I don't speak very good. Okay. So we end up with a lot of discussion about handwriting analysis, and you always have very interesting things to say about it, and people are genuinely interested. They want you to teach a course on this. So let's talk a little bit more about
Let's talk about how we can use graphology principles with hypnosis, because this was what I wrote a thesis on. And the interesting thing about it is there's some very nice simple things you can do that help your hypnotic work if you can look at the person's handwriting first. I'll give you a couple of basic ones. One of them is, if the person has very large upper loops in their writing, like you'd see in small letter H's and small letter L's, if their loop is quite large and wide, and if it is added to by the fact that their small letter E's are almost round, they're very wide and open instead of being narrow, this person will be pretty well open to anything you suggest. You can do anything as an induction if they have rounded small letter E's and if they have upper loops that are large, because this is their imagination. And I did a case I worked on for Durham Regional Police years ago. It was the easiest hypnotic induction I ever did. The client filled in a form, and I saw her small letter E's were almost circles, which is actually, in graphoanalysis, it's called the trait of gullibility. And so when I saw this and saw these huge upper loops, which are, active imagination, she's the one I said, I want you to go in the other room. I'm going to hypnotize you from the other room. And she said, well, what do I have to do? I said, just sit in that chair there. She said, do I have to concentrate or something? I said, no. I said, just read a magazine or do whatever you want. She said, how long will it take? I said, it's a couple of minutes. So she went, okay. So she sat in the chair, and I think she had a Time magazine or whatever. And I went back in the living room where the detectives were and just waited about 5 minutes, and then walked in, and she was staring at a point in the ceiling, and her eyes were fixed, and there was no blink reflex, and her face was flaccid, and she'd gone into a somnambulistic trance. And it's because I saw in the writing the circular formation of the small letter E's. They were very round instead of being narrow. Narrow-mindedness, of course, shows us the opposite, narrow small letter E's. Another thing you can do, though, is if the person's writing is extremely small, that is the trait of concentration. And that is the person who you do an eye fixation induction or whatever, braid induction, Nancy method, whatever. You will rapidly determine that they will have great powers of concentration. They will fixate their attention on one idea, one point, and that's the way to go with them because it will trance them out so rapidly because their concentrative powers are so profound. Another one is if you see a lot of V-shaped structures in small letter M's and N's and even in the small letter H, where it looks like a downward pointing triangle with a sharp point. This is analytical ability. And if I see a lot of this in the writing, especially if there's no upper loops, which is a lack of imagination, I know I'm dealing with a very factual, analytical person, and spinning some sort of complex hypnotic web is not going to be the way to go with that person because they'll be analyzing my techniques constantly and coming up with no, because they're tearing it apart internally. So instead, that's when I'll be doing a leverage induction. I'll be creating catalepsy or something, putting their attention out of the visual sense and out of the auditory sense into a profound kinesthetic or feeling sense, whereupon they will go into trance very, very quickly.
Okay, I need to get you to put this on paper and show some examples of what this looks like. And maybe we can even record a voice track over top and turn it into a YouTube video for people to look at. So
yes, absolutely. I'd be more than happy to show some of these. In fact, one of the best things to add to your writing to change your personality, because this podcast is about all sorts of neuroscience as well as hypnosis and NLP and personality typing and so on, learning, in fact, and peak performance states. One of the things is what Chris is drawing right now on this whiteboard beside me, which is called the literary D or the Greek D or the delta D. And this basically is a small letter D when you're writing cursive writing. Instead of making the typical one, you start by making a counterclockwise circle or pinched circle and then continue counterclockwise into the stem that goes off to the left and stops. So it looks like a reversed number 6, a mirror image of a number 6. When you do your letter Ds like this builds in writing ability and way with words. And this is an absolutely astounding trait. We now know through graphotherapy that by changing handwriting, we change the personality because it is not the hand that writes. It's the prefrontal cortex, and it's a complex neuromuscular function that's fired from there, initiated from there. And if we change the handwriting, we then change the personality over a short period of time, as little as a month. So I was at the British Museum in London and back in the mid-1990s, and I had occasion to examine the writing of Lewis Carroll and Samuel Johnson and some of my heroes, and they had the literary D in their writing. And I was so impressed with this that I thought, okay, I'm going to add this to my writing as well. And I put the literary D in my writing and went on to write for City Bites magazine and a wine column, and wound up writing for Ontario Arts Review as a theatre critic, and had a short story published in the Toronto Star and a poem about Glenn Gould published on his website. And all these things came out of the literary D, but the way it happened, Chris, was so astounding. I put this in my writing and forgot about it. And I did it routinely for about 10 minutes a day. And by the way, Chris has this in his writing. He's an excellent writer. It changes the way we think. And what happened was I put it in my writing, forgot about it, went to the world's biggest bookstore, which is the actual name of the bookstore in Toronto, to pick up a couple of hypnosis texts I wanted. And when I got there, I got waylaid, and I wound up coming home with no hypnosis books at all, but about half a dozen hardcover poetry books. Wordsworth, Keats, Robert Frost. I mean, it was insane. Lord Byron, George Gordon. And my wife said, "What are you doing with all these poetry books?" I said, "I don't know. I get it." I said, "I opened one and I get it." She said, "What do you mean you get it?" I said, "It speaks to me now. It resonates with me in this profound way. Now I know what poetry's about. I don't know why." And she said, "Oh, you idiot, you put the literary D in your writing months ago." And I totally had forgotten. So that's something you can add to your writing. And of course, this is something I'll be teaching at the Valdemar Group.
Now, is there a verbal equivalent for the literary D? Because I tend to trip over my words so much.
Well, it is actually, Chris. What you can do is start making small letter Gs like a figure 8 instead of a G. And that adds a way with words and mental fluidity as well. And this is a remarkable trait. You'll often see that with people who have, I'm just writing it for them, like, say that's good. Okay, so it's an 8.
We'll put that in the show notes.
Yes, we will put it in the show notes. But people who have a good way with words will have letter G's like a figure 8, and even letter F, small letter F, will be reversed loops. So I'd have to draw that one as well, but it's essentially the same thing. People who have this in their writing, most of the time I say, "Do you play Scrabble or do any other word games?" And 90% of the time they go, "Yeah, how could you know that?" Well, it's the way with words in the writing. So if you add that, he's doing multiple examples here, but we're getting some horrible psychotic loops here. developing as well. So Chris has now become a psychopath while attempting to create the D in the literary the fluid G at the same time. So hide the knives from. We're back to the Dexter thing from many podcasts ago. Isn't it weird? Those of you following us know that Dexter keeps resurfacing with Chris. He doesn't just look like him. Now he writes like him as well.
Now I write like a psychopath. Thanks, Mike. You've screwed me up even more.
And we hear the sound of the knife clicking open.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, what do we got next? Let's talk about mindscaping.
Yes, there are things online called mindscaping that are not my product. Mindscaping is a means I've discovered of accessing the unconscious very, very quickly. It was always there. I didn't create it. I just found it. And we taught it to our first master hypnotists at our Architecture of Hypnosis course back in April. And this has become part of our master course from now on. We are going to be offering a mindscaping weekend-long course in Toronto in February, I believe.
February 9th and 10th.
And this is going to be for people to come in and study all weekend. You will learn mindscaping. You'll become certified in it. And you'll be able to use it in your practice if you're a counselor, if you're a therapist, if you're a hypnotist, a psychologist. We welcome all of you to the world's most multicultural, tolerant city, Toronto, Canada, the very solar plexus of hypnosis. And come and learn mindscaping in February. You are going to love it. It has blown people's minds, not surprisingly. And it's a great way of accessing the unconscious. You can use it for creating a salubrious effect on the immune system. You can use it for reducing trauma and anxiety and building in learning states and getting rid of inability to move forward and all kinds of cool stuff. So watch for mindscaping in February at the University of Toronto with me and Chris.
So anyone can come and learn this that do not need a background in NLP or
Absolutely.
hypnosis.
Anybody at all. Come and study it, and you'll find it astounding. When I demoed it to the masters who were learning it from me, we gave them mindscaping. I started with the beta version, then perfected it, have version 1.0 now. One of them was being scaped, as we say, and 3 minutes, just the tears started to flow as the release of all this archived material began, and she moved on very, very rapidly from there. It has a profound psychological effect at a great depth, far beyond the simplicity of the method.
Yeah, not to suggest that everyone cries when they go through this process.
No, I'm just talking about the depth of what it was doing. That's what she needed at that time to unlock some specific emotions.
Yeah, tears of joy in her case. All right, I want to talk about Trance because on the last podcast we talked about the DVD set that's coming out and in inducing trance using rapid leverage inductions. You can create a light trance very easily in yourself or in someone else using simple hypnotic tools. I want to talk about deepening trance. Now, I think this is one of the keys that a lot of hypnotists are not good at, and hence they wreck their work by, as you've talked about, getting people to speak in light trance. We have a view of zoning people through the floor.
Always,
right?
yes.
So you get a crack in the iceberg, and then you stick a crowbar in it, and you make it
or run
bigger.
A ship into it or something. That's good, Chris. We're back to the freaking Titanic again. So there's always death dripping from every podcast, lurking in the background in some way, but we're doing it jokingly, so it doesn't really matter when we admit it, so it's okay. When you put someone in a trance, it is incumbent upon the hypnotist to deepen the trance. And the simplest ways are the best ones. There's all kinds of things. One of the methods I love for deepening trance, and this presupposes you've not done something like an Elman induction, which will create a somnambulistic state anyway with about 90% of people the first time they experience it. But one of the simplest ways of deepening trance is a very good one that Hibbert and Waring mention in their book on forensic hypnosis, which is the shoulder press. And of course, you always warn the subject, client / hypnotist, victim, whatever, victim. On stage, or whatever it is, the person you're working with, you always warn them before you touch them. We'll edit that last thing out, Chris, just in case. But you press on their shoulders, not press at the blots, but you press on their shoulders and you warn them first. You say, in a moment, I'm going to stand behind you and just press down on your shoulders. I want you to take a deep breath and exhale. And as you exhale, I'll press down. I want you to go twice as deep. So you do that. They breathe in. You press gently on their shoulders. You don't use force. You just lean your weight forward as they exhale, pressing the shoulders and separating them slightly. And they'll get a more profound relaxation. And you say, that's right, deeper now. Or something like that. Not specific words, but the shoulder press is a great way of getting trance deepened right away. Another way is the simplest way in the world, and I have never seen this written anywhere, and it boggles my mind that I haven't, which is you simply pre-frame it and say to the person, and you're in a nice trance now, but your unconscious mind knows there's a level even deeper than the one where you are now. And I would like your unconscious mind to take you to that much deeper level. now, and just you can make the sound if you want, and watch them go into a deeper level, and you say, that's right, and offer back their behavior, and that will deepen the trance very, very quickly, because when you offer that there is a deeper level and tell the unconscious that it knows that, guess what? It does know that, and it'll take them there, provided you have rapport. Most of the sloppy work we see done by numerous hypnotists and far too many hypnosis trainers comes out of having no rapport with the subject and being far more in love with their own technique and brilliance than they are in helping the person reach some sort of state where they can make real change. I saw one video online where the man had this poor woman slumped over from the waist. Her head was practically on the floor, and he barely looked at her because he was so in love with his own technique and just gabbing away. Here's a woman who might just have eaten lunch, and he's messing up her digestion now. She could tumble out of the chair, land on her head. Always think ecology first. Look after the person. You want them to have a good experience with hypnosis. There's enough hypnotic idiots out there without adding to the list.
That's a great point. Now, I wanted to talk about hypnosis in the context of people's belief systems and believing that it exists or doesn't exist. And the funny thing here is hypnosis is just a word. It's just a label. And I think people have been hypnotized to think that they know what hypnosis is just by watching movies and TV shows.
I'm not sure exactly where you're going with this, Chris. I need you to elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, I got an email from somebody who had written in to my Talking to Toddlers email address from my Talking to Toddlers email program. And this somebody must have approached her looking to advertise on her website on my behalf. I'm not quite sure how it happened. Anyway, she wrote to me and said, as a Christian who believes in biblical parenting, I could not support your website since I disagree somewhat with your philosophy on parenting. And I thought, well,
did she elaborate on what she disagreed with?
No, not at all, right? So, of course, you're left with this very vague impression of what's going on. And I thought, well, it must be the references to hypnosis in some of the materials, right? Where I explain how basically I explain the genesis of my tools and how they come out of hypnosis and influence and persuasion and rapport building and essentially parenting in such a way that
parenting effectively.
Yeah. So I wrote back to her. I said, well, unless you disagree with raising children who are happy, well-adjusted, socially able to think about solving their own problems and generally feeling connected to their parents, I can't see where the disagreement would come from.
Bravo, Watson.
Now, I'm on purpose, I did not mention hypnosis, but I wanted to see if that's what she would come at with. So I said, unless you're creating assumptions without having a proper understanding, I'm not really sure what the disagreement comes from. And so she wrote back and said, I do not believe in hypnosis of any sort. And I thought that was...
What's she think about dentistry? Does she believe in that?
Well, exactly.
You don't believe in it.
So when you talk about hypnosis with someone, they are often hypnotized, if they aren't educated, hypnotized into having a belief. I mean, maybe I'm using the wrong word, but that's my point.
They're conditioned into believing that hypnosis is something it isn't. Well, this is something we run into again and again, and you're hearing this from a unique pair of voices here, because Chris is an agnostic/atheist, although I've never met a real atheist in my life. I've met a number of agnostics.
Well, this is what I was going to ask you about, because I have absolutely no education of any kind when it comes to religion.
Well, of course, because how could you possibly hold that point of view if you had any education? An agnostic comes from gnosko in the Greek, which means I do not know, because the A is the negation. An atheist postulates or posits the non-existence of any supreme being anywhere in the universe, which of course is impossible to do unless you are prescient and all-knowing yourself. So it's self-stultifying. Now, the interesting thing is, so Chris and I come at this from two different angles. I'm a Reformed Christian, unapologetically so. And to me, I've run into this a lot, Chris, way more than you have.
Oh, I'm sure.
And the number of times, we'd be at church, and one church we used to attend was pretty... It was getting a bit weird, and I left for theological reasons. We attend a quiet little Presbyterian church now with a lot of Scots and Irish and that. And but people would routinely come up and hand me stuff that would say, oh, I printed this off the internet. You need to read this. And okay. And it would say, hypnosis, threat or menace.
Yeah.
I mean, these double binds. It's guys, I finally started saying, guys, chapter and verse. I have a biblical worldview. Show me where in the canon of Scripture you're getting this. Well, of course they can't, because it isn't there. Hypnosis is just very effective communication, and it's a tremendous tool for good. And people can be using hypnotic techniques like playing an organ in church and playing sad music and getting people crying and all sorts of things with all the best intention in the world, but it can still be hypnotic. Let's get rid of this nonsense about hypnosis being demonic or any of these things. It's pure science, certainly the way I do it. as you know, Chris, I don't engage in so-called, past life hypnosis or any of this stuff. I engage in scientific hypnosis and the training of scientific hypnosis. And it's a wonderful tool for accessing the unconscious mind, which you can clearly prove exists because I've never met a single person who is running their heart valves consciously.
Well, actually, that raises an interesting point. So I read an article, and I can't remember who wrote it, nor does it really matter, talking about, oh no, it was a YouTube video. It was a YouTube video of somebody saying that there is no such thing as the unconscious mind. I thought, well, I think this guy doesn't get the point that it's a metaphor. You can't cut the unconscious mind away from the conscious mind.
It's a model. It's a model. It's a way of understanding how the mind works. And it's consistent within itself. It's just a useful model. And if you act as though there's an unconscious mind that can be accessed through various means, then you'll discover that there is, at least within the constraints of that model, which leads us now to our metaphor.
Right.
Because our time is getting short, and I want to tell you about Claremont, Ontario, which is just north of the city of Toronto. Back when I was about 19, my sister and her husband had moved to Claremont, to an old home that had been renovated, and I think it used to be a blacksmith shop. And this house had sort of an extension put on it, up about 3 steps. And when they moved in, my sister and her husband were unable to get their queen-size bed upstairs. It didn't fit. And so I think they bought a new bed, and they put this one in a guest room on the main floor, just up these 3 steps in the back of the house. And they started getting the most bizarre phenomena occurring within that house. For instance, my niece, who is a naturopath now, Toronto's best naturopath, and she's got the hypnotic gene. She's really good at it. She was an infant at the time, or a toddler, let's say. And my sister awoke because they heard crying in the night and followed the sound downstairs in the night, in the dark. And Michelle was sitting at the kitchen table just crying quietly. And my sister said, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And she said, "What are you doing down here?" And my niece said, "Haggy brought me downstairs." Like, whoo, Haggy, like what the heck is that? But it got weirder. And furniture would be moved around a little bit in the night. They'd come down and kitchen chairs would be pushed back and so on. And one of the strangest events happened when my mother babysat for my niece at the time. My mom was sleeping in the bed that was on the main floor and woke up in the middle of the night to use the washroom. And she walked across the floor in the night, in the dark, and down the 3 steps across a large open space to the guest washroom. And as she walked across the floor, she suddenly tripped. And as she told it, she tripped over a person in the dark who was on their hands and knees crawling out of her way. And it stopped her at her knees, and she fell flat in her face, jumped up petrified, turned on the light, and of course there was nobody there. And it got stranger and stranger. And one Thanksgiving weekend, I was jamming with a band in town. I was 18 at this time, 18, 19 maybe, and walked by the garage as I came back to the house and from the jam session to have dinner with the family. And as I walked by the front of the garage, I glanced up and saw a man I didn't recognize standing in the back of the garage wearing gray coveralls with something in his hands, looking down, fiddling with it. And I thought, who the heck was that? So as I walked up the driveway or the laneway beside the garage, I looked in the window at the side. And not only was there no man in there, but my sister's car, a 61 Chev, was in the garage that had been empty in my vision a few seconds before. And so that was, I think, close to the end of our Claremont experience.
And thanks for that closing metaphor, as always, Mike. So head on over to our website, MikeMandel.hypnosis.com, where you can get more information. And eventually there'll be something up there on the Mindscaping course in February. There's nothing on there as of the date we're recording this. I'll aim to change that. And head on over to iTunes and leave a rating for this podcast. We always love getting more and more honest ratings for the show.
Send us your emails.
That's right. Send us your questions. Questions at MikeMandelHypnosis.com. And we will see you on the next podcast.